morning and welcome to your Thursday edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss around policy, investments, and the political space. Wherever you are, watching from Nigeria and across the world, it is another interesting day. Today we normally take our time to discuss developments at the subnational level because the subnational is as important as the federal level. We note that most times we focus more on the federal government, its activities, and leave out the states, who are the key drivers also of governance that stems down to the grassroots. And so today we'll continue our interactions and conversation around states and infrastructure, some issues that should be taken into consideration. But let's give you a lineup of what we'll be looking at today, September 10th, 2020. First, the latest information around Nigeria's debt. Nigeria's current debt has risen to 2.38 trillion naira. And also, President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday inaugurated the Nigeria 2050 Agenda Steering Committee. We'll bring you excerpts from the latest update from the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. It issued a 15-point agenda and will take 2 excerpts as it concerns states. We'll also look at states and infrastructure in various dimensions and how it is critical at this time. The Debt Management Office yesterday released Nigeria's total public debt stock as of June 30, 2020. It put the country's entire debt at approximately 31 trillion naira, indicating an increase of 2.38 trillion naira within a space of 3 months. Nigeria's total public debt stock includes the debt stock of the federal government, the 36 states, and the Federal Capital Territory. According to the Debt Management Office, just as the country's public debt stock report was released, the actual external debt service payments in second quarter 2020, as well as Nigeria's external debt stock as of June 30, 2020, were also released. The DMO said the data showed that in Naira terms, the total public debt stock, which comprises the debt stock of the federal government, the 36 states, and the Federal Capital Territory, stood at 31.009 trillion naira, or $85.897 billion. The corresponding figures for March 31st, 2020 were 28.628 trillion naira, or $79.303 billion. The Debt Office explained that the increase in the debt stock by 2.38 trillion naira, or $6.593 billion, was accounted for by the $3.36 billion budget support loan from the International Monetary Fund. New domestic borrowings to finance the revised 2020 Appropriation Act. It said this includes the issuance of the 162.557 billion naira sukuk and promissory notes issued to settle the claims of exporters. The Debt Office added that the DMO expects the public debt stock to grow as the balance of the new domestic borrowing is raised and expected disbursements are made by the World Bank, African Development Bank, and Islamic Development Bank, which were arranged to finance the 2020 budget. According to the DMO, it said, recall that the 2020 Appropriation Act had to be revised in the face of adverse and severe impacts of COVID-19 on government's revenues and increased expenditure needs on health and economic stimulus, amongst others. It stated that additional promissory notes were expected to be issued in the course of the year. DMO said that new borrowings by state governments were also expected to increase the public debt stock. So definitely state governments will be borrowing and will be monitoring those borrowings because it's become very important to beam the searchlight on how states are matching their borrowings with the expected evidenced infrastructure that can transform the subnationals. Over the years, and we can say since our independence, we've had this challenge and legacy of so much borrowings from states, but not matching the expected development. So it becomes very important that we begin to beam the searchlight and see how the states are operating. At the national level, I say, also definitely concern states, as the quest for development planning strategies very important for a nation to achieve transformation. President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday inaugurated the National Steering Committee for the Vision 2050 agenda. The National Steering Committee is to oversee the development of the Nigerian agenda and medium-term national development plan, which is to succeed Vision 2020 and the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020. Business leader, Mr. Ottoabasi Abasiekong, and the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, will jointly chair the Committee for the Development Plan. The Special Advisor to the President of Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina, disclosed this in a statement titled Agenda 2050. President Buhari inaugurates National Steering Committee. He said the new development plan will lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty by 2030. So we're already ticking. The clock is ticking. We're already starting to count how this will happen. This is 2020, so the target is by 2030, 100 million Nigerians should be lifted out of poverty. Now, the main objective of this committee, succeeding the other plans, is, of course, poverty alleviation. And within the next 10 years, it has carved out the plan to hit a World Bank projection that Nigeria will be the third most populous nation by 2050 with over 400 million people. He quoted President Buhari as saying that it has become necessary to develop successor plans to the Nigerian Vision 2020 and the ERGP in order to ensure continuity and efficiency in the country's development planning. The President said the committee would oversee governance structure comprising the Central Working Group and 26 technical working groups for the important national assignments. The President added, "It is my expectation that the steering committee will oversee the execution of key deliverables, including recommending measures to ensure the continuous implementation of the plans even after the expiration of the tenure of successive administrations, including legislation if required. Such legislation may introduce much needed rigor and discipline to the nation's development planning, as well as institutionalize planned outcomes for the future." The President trusts that the partners in the National Assembly will support in exploring these reforms as critical for the nation's economic development strategy. President Buhari urged members of the committee not to lose sight of the important role Nigeria plays on the continent as well as in the global community. Very important. I like the aspect of the legislation because over the years we've had plans, but they're not sustained. So it will be a welcome development if National Assembly follows through with a legislation that is signed into law, so that whichever government comes into office will look at those laws to improve on them, not to completely discard them, because sustainable development planning, long-term economic planning has been one thing that has bedeviled Nigeria. Think about it. If we had sustained a national development plan right from the 70s as earmarked, when we had the likes of renowned economists and scholars like late Professor Samuel Boyade, even down to Professor Sam Aluko between 1993 and 1994, we would have come to this stage of very efficient results. And so we hope that this will not longer be the tradition of one plan is developed and later discarded. Imagine since 1999, when we had a democracy, a fourth republic that has been sustained for over 2 decades now. Imagine if we had a plan spanning that period. Definitely would have made real impact. And say over 100 million Nigerians during that period, between 1999 and 2020, were moved up from the poverty net. You can imagine what Nigeria would be like. So definitely this is a big challenge. The next 10 years, starting from 2020, we need to see this plan sustained. We need to see political will. We need to see strategy. We need to see cohesion, consistency, support, collaboration, and we will be on that pathway to lifting 100 million Nigerians from poverty. It's very important because poverty is a huge crisis that nations are battling. India is an example of a country that lifted millions from poverty. Brazil is another example of a country that lifted millions from poverty. How much for Nigeria? We can do it if we set our heart and axe to it. Let's go on to the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, a leading policy think tank group. NESG since the early 90s have been instrumental to a lot of macroeconomic reforms that has brought in private sector participation in the country. Talk about steps taken in liberalization, even down to the telecommunications sector, even into partnerships in governance and in investments. NESG has always been there, driving the advocacy. And so recently, it issued a 15-point statement on Nigeria's economy, giving their perspective and also proffering solutions. So we take excerpts from that 15-point statement. We look at the areas that are of interest also to the states. And the 8th and 9th statement is what we will capture for today. The Nigeria Economic Summit Group, in its 8 points out of the 15-point statement, commends the federal government's efforts on infrastructural development across the country. There's been huge efforts by this administration to address infrastructure. But it's respectfully advising that given the enormity of financial resources required to meet a largely decayed infrastructural stock, many more options should be explored to attract private sector capital and involvement. However, such options and alternatives must always be subject to clear rules, open, transparent, following due process and the enshrinement of the sanctity of contracts. In my recent conversations with some state government officials, it is very clear that there are some areas that are very important to address in this regard when it has to do with infrastructure development at a time where the country needs capital, at a time where the budget of a state, even if summed up together, the highest budget of any state in Nigeria is always from Lagos State. So even if Lagos were the budget about 1 trillion naira on infrastructure in the whole state, it wouldn't be enough. Wholly focusing its budget on infrastructure. These are times for attracting more private capital. And most states don't even spend up to 30 to 40% on capital expenditure. So that shows you why the private sector has to be encouraged. And based on my interaction with the current Commissioner of Finance in Ekiti State, Mr. Kemi, and also Mr. Ibrahim Abdullah, he is Special Assistant to the Governor of Nasarawa State on industries, trade, and investments. We're seeing that states are beginning to understand the need to address some of these issues. First is the law around public-private partnerships. Ekiti State is already taking a very proactive step in reworking the laws and ensuring that the PPP laws enables effective public-private partnerships that can help attract capital into the states and address infrastructural concerns. So this is also the pathway that we expect other states to approach PPP laws that enables that engagement, that attracts those investments that can help address the infrastructural deficit that is across the states. The second is the Enabling Business Environment. We already have a Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, set up by this administration to improve Nigeria's business environment. So at this point, we want to see more activity and more breadth in terms of the coverage and scope of the ease of doing business. Every state should take it very important, and we even like the fact that PEBEC has organized every year awards to recognize states that are also taking the lead in improving the ease of doing business in their territory. And so it's very important that states continue to give top priority to the ease of doing business. Digitalization of processes has become very important because in the fourth industrial revolution driven by digital technology, we need to ensure that processes are digitized for transparency, for openness, and accountability. So, of course, in the issue of infrastructure, we need to see much of that happen. The sanity of contracts is very important. I mean, think about it. There was a story of someone I knew very well, had an investment in a stadium project, and I'll come to that later. And so they have done their investments and already signed the contract with this particular government. But the next government comes in and the first thing he did was to cancel that project. So imagine how much that person lost in terms of investment and the partnership. This cannot continue. There must be sanctity of contracts irrespective of which government is in place. These are the things that scare away investments and even partnerships on areas like infrastructure. So we need to end that era where a contract is agreed on and then a subsequent government comes in and terminates the contract, thereby affecting investor confidence in how we deal with infrastructure at the subnational level. The next one is the Bureau of Public Procurement. BPPs have to be strengthened across states. So if contracts are bidded for, we should see a very open process on how people got the bid to embark on execute a project. Most states, several states are beginning to understand that, and they have digitized the process, like I said earlier, and on the official sites of state governments, you can see where they have the space for the BPPs and how various contracts are bidded for and awarded. We need to see this across all states so that people can be able to take that right decision. And I can assure states that when they have a good BPP, they will not even need to struggle or hurry or rush for attracting investments. And then in this phase, the last part is value-driven projects. We have a challenge of some projects that do not have economic significance. Maybe sometimes, with all due respect, some governors just try to do things for what they call effigy or political expedience. So if you build a stadium and you cannot bring the whole ecosystem of how it will create value for the states, create jobs, and improve revenue, then what value is that? Airports are good too, but if you cannot key in an industry around that airport, of what value is that project? And these are projects that go up billions of naira. So this is to the states. If you want to embark on a project, it should not be competing with other states. You have to look at what works for you. What are your endowments? What are your factor endowments? And then from there, you can cite that project knowing that you're going to get economic value from it. If not, to be all those huge pipeline projects that are a waste. Waste of resources, waste of citizens, the taxpayers' money. The NESG also acknowledged that government efforts has been ongoing in reopening the Eastern Port. That's number 9 of the NESG statement. The Eastern Port, and has urged that the rail link between Onne and Port Harcourt should be given urgent attention so as to avoid replicating the Apapa port experience. For those of us in Lagos know how challenging Apapa port is. In the same light, NESG wishes to call for urgent solutions to Apapa port congestion, which is a work in progress, and other difficulties in effectively efficient export and import of goods. They agree that the seaport is an economic lifeline critical for the diversification of Nigeria's economy. And that brings me to the South-South, which is a very strategic region in Nigeria. I call it the coastal hub of Nigeria. I call it the oil and gas hub of Nigeria. And as you know, till now, till when we get there, crude oil is still a major revenue earner. So you can't ignore the Niger Delta. But beyond the fact that there is crude oil in huge deposits in this region, there is also a logistics hub provision from the South-South. And so it is a good thing that we're going to see some effort in harnessing the Eastern Port axis, because it has always been more of Lagos axis, and the congestion has shown that we can't continue like that. There are projects on the pipeline. For example, in Akwa Ibom State, there is the massive Ibom Deep Sea Port and Industrial Zone projects, which, according to the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, ICRC, received a lot of interest from investors when they had this discussion session at the recent African Development Bank Forum. The DG, Engineer Chidi Zua, believes that this project is vital, and already the full business case has been made for the project, awaiting presidential approval. And also this will be very key in terms of the vetting of the current Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, and even the Managing Director of the Nigerian Port Authority, Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman. That is a very viable project. Then on the other axis, there's already the existing on airports, which is an oil and gas zone, where we have movement of oil and gas platforms and activities. But believe me, there's a need for synergy in the South-South, because there are other ports that are being in the pipeline. For example, in Edo State, there's the Gelegele port. Delta State already has the existing Warri ports. Calabar already had a port, but the state government, current administration, is now looking at a Bakassi deep sea port. And Bayelsa State is also looking at having a seaport. So there is need for synergy. I think the South-South states may have to agree and concede to one or two major viable ports. Don't forget that the Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Amechi, said, prior to now, we had more of river ports. So Lekki deep sea port is going to be a massive port infrastructure, and of course, the ones like Ibom deep sea port in Akwa Ibom State. So if we want to really have something viable, we will have to see the South-South work together to support what will be of immense industrialization and economic value to the region and to the country. Having so many ports clustered around may not really help. But again, the economic viability is very important. That's the perspective on it, so that we don't miss out from necessary approvals and the gains of being a logistics hub and a critical industrial zone in Nigeria. That's for the South-South. Also, we expect that the federal government, working with the various states, can quickly ramp up and address the East-West route. That's a very critical infrastructure in the South-South region, and other highways or roads like Calabar too. If those two, for example, can be addressed, to make a significant impact in the region. Let's move on quickly to the challenge of infrastructure development in states. First, of course, like I said, there is vested political interest. Some projects are not thought through. They just do it. It's just done based on political interest. Second is corruption. Corruption in terms of projects that are not of value, but are pipelines for corruption. And it is very, very unfortunate that this happens sometimes at the state level. Lack of transparency in the process of engagement, whether with the contractors, with communities involved, it's really a challenge. Issues of capital investment. Sometimes a project is earmarked, but the pipeline for financing it is not concluded, and again, it is stalled and becomes an abandoned project syndrome. And then the issues of environmental impact assessment. You can't do projects without thoroughly taking out an EIA. This involves environmentalists, experts, looking around the community, looking at the overall intent of the project and its impact on the society. And of course, as we drive our sustainable development goals in Nigeria, EIAs are very important. Then the issues of the absence of community engagement. Sometimes projects are cited in communities without even engaging the people, and at the end, it doesn't add any value to the community. And of course, the syndrome of white elephant projects. We've seen so much of it. And that is why it's a major concern and why people will need to address that quickly. Recently, we heard that some states are facing insolvency, and it's a huge concern. And this is why, at this time, such states should be seen to be very prudent and reinvent themselves, because as we talk about Nigeria's rising debt, challenges of infrastructure financing, such states will even need to take extra efforts in managing their funds and seeing how they can continue to provide value to their citizens. States like Bayelsa, it's a big surprise. Bayelsa is in the South-South region. It's an oil-rich state with huge oil and gas investments. How it is in that category is still a topic of discussion. Kebbi State is in the Northwest. And Northeast Borno State, to some extent, because of being the epicenter of insurgency in Nigeria, has its infrastructure and economic activities disrupted for a long time, and of course, it can be understood if it's not really able to quickly ramp up in terms of revenue and economic activities. Taraba is one state that really needs to unlock itself. I mean, it's in the northeast. Taraba has huge potentials in terms of infrastructure and even tourism. So we have come to a point where states have to rework their strategies. Of course, the federal government can also continue those measures of support. And this is why I want to reemphasize again the need for fiscal restructuring. A fiscal restructuring that allows states to get more in terms of distribution of revenue and to also have more access in terms of resources. The exclusive list has so much for the federal government, and states have a lot of resources they can't tap because they are not on the concurrent list. So the National Assembly and the executive, the ball is in the court. We can't continue in this manner if we're going to have a vibrant nation. States cannot continue to be going to Abuja, finance commissioners going to debate revenue allocations when the federal takes the big pie. Imagine a situation where the federal currently takes 52%, states have 27%, local governments have 21%. So the federal government is taking almost half of what the state has. Yet, the activities are supposed to be more at the state level and local government level. So definitely, we're long overdue for a fiscal restructuring experience. And the earlier we do that, the better, because at this point, Nigeria, like other countries in the world, are looking at how to be sustainable. We have the crude oil volatility price crisis, a major revenue earner, and of course, the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global supply chain activities across the globe. So these are the best times to make drastic moves, tough choices, and decisions that will have sustainable impact on our socio-economic space. The time is now, and we must no longer delay in this debate and conversation on fiscal restructuring. States have so much burden, just listed some states that have been classified as insolvent. Those states will definitely face challenges in managing their operations. Also amongst the states believed to be high in debt, the top economic states, and perceived to be able to repay their debts because of the resources and prospects for much revenue distribution and generation. So imagine if they have more access. The fear of the fact that the states may not manage it well shouldn't come. Rather, the federal government should look at shedding more that it controls. Very important for Nigeria. Now let's go to the issues of critical infrastructures that must be top priority for states. As you're aware, some states are already gearing up to resume schools after several months of closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Education infrastructure must be top priority for all state governments. And so we must look at ensuring that schools have the basic facilities, fencing, decent environment for learning. There are a lot of schools that when shown on TV and pictures are in a very deplorable state. We need the state governments to explore how they want to transform the entire education infrastructure right from the tertiary to the secondary and primary. Education is a very key tool for Nigeria, human capital development, and indeed productivity. So if we are going to get it right, we must invest in education infrastructure. And that is why as we build up to 2021 budgets, we'll be looking at the budgets of all states for education and also look at what they're earmarking for infrastructure. It is very critical to see how states are thinking in that direction. Also, healthcare infrastructure is very important. COVID-19 pandemic brought to the fore the need to reinvent healthcare and ensure that we have those basic health amenities, particularly for the primary healthcare centers. I remember that this administration talked about 1,000 primary healthcare centers well equipped. It's time to revisit that. Across the country, we need to have effective, well-equipped primary healthcare centers that can treat major cases and issues that people in the rural areas can have access to. And then, of course, we can go on to teaching hospitals, also state hospitals that are fully equipped with all the state-of-the-art equipment that can begin to reduce the incidence of medical tourism. And come to think of it, this period of the pandemic, people couldn't travel, so it was an opportunity for Nigeria to take seriously healthcare infrastructure. And I hope the state governments will put this on board seriously. Lagos state government has taken the lead in terms of increasing its allocation to healthcare. They're going to make it by 20%. And that is something we hope to have a conversation, one of these editions, with the Commissioner for Health in Lagos. And then in the area of roads, roads have to be thought through in terms of economic significance. And so it is time for states to once again look at the master plan, particularly for capital cities and other adjoining towns, to look at roads that have economic significance and improved connectivity. Those roads can also be achieved in terms of financing through public-private partnerships. Waste management and environments is very important. How we manage our environments has become a major issue in Nigeria. As we see the rainy seasons across various parts of the country, floods, it once again speaks to how we are managing our waste and also how we are effectively taking the environment. And so it's an opportunity for state governments to ensure that the infrastructure for effective waste management and a clean environment are given top priorities. And just for this edition, we'll wrap up with power. Power is very critical. So far, since 2013, liberalization, there's still been challenges around how the various segments, the transmission, which is wholly owned by the federal, the distribution companies and the generation companies can continue to contribute and ensure that we have electricity and improved capacity. Currently, our generation capacity is 5,000 megawatts, when Nigeria needs times 1,000 of that. And so states, again, looking at our fiscal composition, should be able to generate more of their power and also look at how they can make it a commercial value and invest in renewables for rural communities working with local governments. This is something that, again, brings to the fore revisiting our energy laws in Nigeria and looking at how states can be empowered to do more in the area of power provisions for their people. But these are part of the major discussions around how we can begin to address infrastructure, because if we do, with the fiscal restructuring that I once again bring to the fore, then Nigeria should begin to be looking at achieving development and inclusive growth. Well, let's stop there for now. We'll continue this conversation in subsequent editions. That'll be all for today's edition of the Economy and Politics Show. You can visit our website, www.prochange.com, to watch our videos, read our news reports, and our analysis. Don't forget to send your views and comments to news@prochange.com based on some of the things we've discussed today. Your concerns too, we would receive them, and of course, we'll get back to you. Don't forget also by 10 a.m. we'll have a market review where we look at the nexus between the financial and capital market as it affects the economy. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice day and stay safe.